Hey guys, tonight we re-stepping barefoot into something a little gritty, a little slippery, and surprisingly essential to civilization. Salt. But not just any salt. We recoiling back over 1,000 years to the humid shores and tank-led mangroves of what snow believes to live a day or maybe a lifetime as a salt worker in the ancient Maya world. Yes, you're about to become a Maya salt merchant. You may smell like brine and smoke by the end of this, and honestly, you might not survive your first shift without falling face first into the marsh. But hey, that's part of the charm. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you re-added, drop a comment telling me what city you re-in and what time you re-listening. I love imagining the little constellation of sleepy listeners all around the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a font for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Welcome to your first day of work. You still remember that last night? The master took you around those unnamed trees and walked along a path that was almost untouched. He said, if you can survive here for 3 months, I will teach you how to look at the wind direction too. Choose the salt position, of course. You understood the key point is dainty first. Your backpack only contains a dried corn cob, a flint, and a few salt crystals for sacrifice. Don't ask why they are put together. The air is salty, but it is not the kind of freshness at the seaside, but the complex smell of mud, fire, and years. You watched the old workers around, you carefully stepping on the compacted wood and plank passage. They skillfully avoided the soft mud spots that seemed solid but would suddenly collapse. You imitated their pace, swaying with every step, like a bird that has just learned to walk. The morning task is simple, at least it sounds like. That in their mouths, you have to pick out the salt crystals that were dried yesterday, put them into woven bags, and then move them into the wooden house storage room. This sounds like a porter shop, but each bag must be weighed to determine whether the water content is acceptable. The first time you tried to pick up a bag, you almost dislocated your shoulder. An uncle smiled and said, you still have to drink some bitter water to recognize what is good salt. The Maya believed that salt was not given by seawater, but was exchanged by God from fire. Those salt crystals boiled in pots are made by wood, pottery pots, flames, wind, and waiting. This is not something that can be solved by just sprinkling a handful of sun. This entire salt field is their patient, experimental field passed down day after day and generation after generation. You stand by the pot and watch the seawater bubbling. The water surface is boiled to a faint green light, and salt crystals slowly form at the bottom of the pot, just like when you secret limeade rock candy at the bottom of a cup when you were ogled. Only this time, it can be sold for money. Historians are actually still arguing whether this pot cooking method was first used in the Mayan salt fields. Some people say it is foreign technology, and some people believe that the Maya had mastered extremely complex thermal control techniques thousands of years ago. Don't worry about it. All you know now is that the pot is hot, the salt is heavy, and your feet hurt. Your hut is right next to the salt pan, with a high floor supported by a frame made of mangrove wood to prevent water from pouring in. When the rainy season comes, you climbed up the ladder, and before you put your head into the roof, you were choked by the smell of smoke. It turned out that the bonfire left by the previous person had not been extinguished. You sat down, took a breath, dragged the first batch of salt bags into the corner of the house, and then heard someone in the distance calling your name, telling you "Dan tab lazy." You want to say, I just worked for a morning. There is no lunch, but there are corn, pulp, and salt bags. You squatted under the eaves, chewing rubber-like corn balls, looking at the distant trade road leading to the inland. I heard that in a few days, you will try to take that road and replace salt with something else, maybe turkey feathers, or maybe corn wine. But now, you have to learn how not to fall into the salt water. The sun is about to set, and you pull your feet out of the mud pit again, your body covered with sweat salt stains, and an inexplicable sense of solidity. Today didn't he become Apperson? who can make salt bloom. But at least you were not swallowed by the swamp. Before you fully open your eyes in the early morning, you hear someone scraping the bottom of a pot outside. It's not a cooking pot, but a wide and heavy clay pot, the pot for boiling salt last night. The sound is like a bird tapping your eardrums, pulling you back to reality from your straw bed. You turn over your head, still smells of smoke from last night's fire. But there's nothing you can do. You re-novice, salt merchant. No novice can sleep until the sun rises completely. You move your body and push open the curtain beside the hammock. A ray of damp light creeps in diagonally, shining on the salt bag in the room that is not yet dried. You forgot to seal it last night, and now the whole bag of salt has absorbed water and is limp, looking like a failed bread. You sigh, knowing that the bag may not be exchanged. The lesson came quickly and was very salty. You picked up the water pitcher, splashed a handful of cold water on your face, then put on coarse clothes and stepped down the wood-in ladder, barefoot. The soles of your feet touch the wood and boards wet with morning dew, as if you were undergoing a ritual. There were already several old salt workers busy outside, and they didn't talk, as if they already knew what to do. Your task today is to learn the great standards of salt from your mentor Amen, named Bachak. Look at this. He pointed to a pinch of salt and rubbed it with his fingertips. This is too wet, too heavy, and can't be stored. This ... well, too broken. Only salt eaten by birds looks like this. Birds eat salt. You couldn't help asking. He glanced at you and shrugged. Who knows? Maybe they are just insects, pecking at the edge of the salt. In this salt field, every grain of salt is regarded as nobler than you. It's not an exaggeration. Salt is not just a seasoning in Mayan society. It is ancillary, a medium of exchange, and a ritual item dedicated to the gods. Some people even speculate that workers in some Mayan cities were paid not with corn, but with salt. Is this the case in all city-states? The academic community is still discussing it, but you can tell from Bachak's attitude that the salt here is sacred. You come to a row of neatly arranged clay pots. He asks you to smell the bottom of the pot, saying that the salt from a new pot and an old pot tastes different. You try to smell it, but end up coughing. He doesn't laugh, but says lightly, "Take your time. Every good salt merchant has to eat a few mouthfuls of ashes first." Then he motions for you to try a pot yourself. You bring a jar of seawater and pour it into the pot. The fire has already risen, and you sit by the pot, staring at the bubbles on the water, imagining that this is wealth boiling. An hour later, the water surface slowly decreases, and crystals begin to form at the edge. You excited, "I want to call your mentor to come and see," but you find that he has been gone without knowing when, leaving you alone to guard the pot. This is also one of the tests for salt merchants. You have to learn to deal with unexpected events alone. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew. The flame jumped, and the pot made a hissing sound. Your heart tightened, and you hurried Layu's astic to adjust the position of the pot. But you slipped and almost overturned the whole pot of salt water. You kneel beside the pot, your hands covered with mud. Your breathing is rapid. After a long while, you dare to continue adding fire. This time you are so careful, as if you are guarding some mysterious life. White salt frost finally begins to emerge from the bottom of the pot. You gently scrape a small handful and put it in the palm of your hand, trying to rub it. It's still too damp, but at least it's not a failure. The sun rises higher, and there is a cough from the salt field. The instructor is back. He glanced at the pot, said nothing more, and handed you a tortilla wrapped in palm leaves. Eat something, otherwise you won't even remember the wind direction. You took it with a smile, and then suddenly realized that this was your second day without complaining. Here you gradually become aerial salt merchant. As you took the second bite of the tortilla, you heard a short and hurried sound of footsteps. You looked up and saw two young men running from the other side of the salt pan, carrying a long stick on their shoulders, with heavy sacks hanging on both ends of the stick. White crystals oozed from the corners of the sacks, which looked like moonlight in the sun. The goods have arrived. They shouted to you in Bachak, their voices a little breathless. You quickly swallowed the bread and followed your mentor through the path beside the swamp to a vacant land dedicated to handling foreign goods. You have never been here before. This land is a little far from the main salt pan, with several narrow drainage ditches in the middle, as if it is intention ally demarcating it from the sacred salt production land. This land is the salt exchange area. You saw the young couple put down their burden and open the bag, which contained several pieces of foreign salt, crystals. You can tell the difference at a glance. Those salt blocks are not boiled from a pot, but naturally crystallized coarse salt, with uneven shapes, and some even with shell fragments. From the Yucatan, Bachek said. They walked for 3 days and 3 nights to exchange for our fire salt. This is the first time you hear the word fire salt. Bachek explained that fire salt is salt that is boiled in a clay pot, dried and then baked again. It is slightly reddish in color, a bit like rust. It doesn't sound very tempting, but it is said to preserve meat, stop bleeding, and even drive away ghosts. Of course, some people say it's just a legend, but these days, legends and market demand are brothers. You squatted down and really participated in the salt-to-salt comparison for the first time. This is not what you think salt is. Different regions and different methods produce salt with different flavors, uses, and even prices. You have to remember, the mentor said, we are not the only salt merchants. The salt road in the entire Mayan world is more complicated than you think. This reminds you of the forest path you saw a few days ago. You thought it was just a shortcut to the nearest street village, but now you understand that it is the capillary leading to the entire Mayan trade network. Historians actually have a lot of disagreements about this. Some believe that the Maya only relied on regional exchanges and did not form a real long-distance trade route. But many scholars have also proposed that the salt field where you are standing now may be the prototype of some kind of regional exchange center. The transaction continues. The young people left their coarse salt, took away a few bags of fire salt, and used Aphither fan as adjunct. This kind of thing is a high-end gift in their village. You asked what kind of bird's feathers it was, and they smiled and said, it's from a colorful cockatoo. Be careful. It's more expensive than salt. After they left, Bachak patted you on the shoulder. Do you know what you learned today? You shook your head. Salt is not just something to eat. It's something that takes you out. You remembered this sentence for a long time. In the evening, you were assigned to sort out today's transaction. Records, pieces of bark paper. Record Ed, who came, what they brought, and what they exchanged. And there were small icons drawn with cornflour next to them, indicating the grade and weight of the salt. When you counted the icons, what you thought in your mind was, where will these salts go in the end? Maybe it will enter the palace to season a pot of turkey soup. Maybe it will be put into the caravan's bag and taken to the plateau to be exchanged for corn wine, or even turquoise beads. Or it may be held in the hands of a patient and taken to sacrifice, praying that he can live longer tomorrow. These salts are really walking. You also begin to feel that you are no longer just an apprentice by the pot. As the night deepens, the salt fields return to silence. You put away the records and lie on the hammock. The wooden house sways slightly, as if floating on the water. You close your eyes, and you can still hear the salt rubbing in the bag, like whispering. You suddenly understand that salt is never silent. It just waits for you to understand its language. *_border. This morning, your task is no longer to burn salt, but to carry salt. It is not the simple operation of carrying it on your back and walking away as you imagined, but a whole set of weight, bearing rituals that starts from the moment you open your eyes. Here where this. An older female worker handed you a coarse woven strap made of bark fiber, which is strong enough to drag a pig. She taught you how to tie the salt bag to the lower end of the strap, and then put the strap on your forehead, so that the entire weight is distributed to your back, waist, and forehead. Don't underestimate this step. She grinned. If you don't tie it well, your waist will break within 3 steps. You doubted Ted whether this was an exaggeration until you really tied it and stood up and almost fell backwards. The salt bag was not big, but it was extremely heavy, and this was only the first bag you had to transport today. You set off with a small team, crossing the woods and stepping on the driftwood. Beside the swamp, the soles of your feet slipped, and the mud immediately climbed up your calves. But you didn't dare to stop. You noticed that everyone is walking and breathing in the same rhythm, as if their bodies have already merged with the salt. You walk with your teeth gritted, and suddenly a voice comes from the back of the team. Do you know how the Maya had measured the preciousness of salt? You turn around and see that it's the old merchant, Kyuchu, who always likes to tell trivia. He does and to carry salt, but just walks slowly with the team with Aztec. He speaks like he's slowly baking tortillas, feeding you bit by bit. It's not the weight nor the color, but how far you've walked. You were about to answer, but you missed a step and almost fell into the bushes next to you. Gatu laughed out loud. See, the salt hasn't walked far, and you almost sacrificed yourself. You can't laugh, but you don't want to fall behind, so you have to bite the bullet and finish the first section of the day. You reach a high ground and take a break. Everyone sits on a big rock, and some people start chewing chili mixed with cocoa beans. This is a way to refresh themselves. You took acid and almost choked to tears. It felt like your mouth had suddenly turned into abrazier. You remembered what Katu said, and your mind began to drift further. Did you know? Some salt is taken to the mountains 100 kilometers away, and some may even cross several city-states along the trade network in the dense forest. Scholars are still arguing whether these routes are officially organized or spontaneous by the people. You looked at your feet and felt that whether it was official or private, the salt was really pressing on your knees. In the afternoon, you finally arrived at a temporary exchange station, which was actually Asimo Circle, surrounded by several stones, like a picnic but not a relaxing place. You saw several people wearing different styles of clothes waiting. They were not local villagers. They spoke another language, wore green feather ornaments, and had a dog with strange fur beside them. It might actually be a large civet cat. Who knows? After the salt bag was put down, you were arranged to sit aside. The adults began to negotiate. Some pointed at the salt bags and gestured. Some took out the wrapped cocoa beans. Another person opened a delicate little basket. Inside was actually shiny shell pieces. You didn't expect that these things could be exchanged for salt in some places. Katu sat next to you and began his whispering teaching again. See, these people are from the lake. Their shells are worthless here, but they can be exchanged for corn and pottery in the inland. Salt is their ticket. You squinted your eyes and didn't understand much, but you felt a lot clearer. You looked at those people. They were sweating and tired like you, but they came for different purposes. When the exchange was over, you had to carry a new bag of goods back to the camp. The sky began to darken, and the mosquitoes began to bar their teeth and claws. You clenched your teeth, not wanting to appear too weak in front of Katu. You have now learned how to adjust your breathing, and how to bend your knees slightly when walking to reduce the impact on your back. You even began to count your steps in your mind, as if the rhythm could reduce the weight. When you finally got back to the camp and put down the bag of salt, you didn't expect that you didn't fall down. You stood up straight and looked at the bag of salt like a piece of trophy. You didn't say anything, just gently pat Ted, the sweat on your forehead, then lay on the ground and watched the stars slowly emerge. Tonight, you are no longer the child by the pot. You are a traveler, returning with salt. The next day you woke up earlier. Your shoulders were still a little sore, but you were actually looking forward to today's task. You ate a small bowl of corn porridge and walked to the edge of the salt pan in the morning mist, but found that Batchak was not guarding the pot as usual. He went into the woods. A girl next to him whispered, bringing fire and flowers. Fire and flowers. You didn't react for a moment, but you followed him. You remember, Ed, that your mentor said that sometimes salt pans also need to be comforted. You followed the trail all the way into the woods. The jungle was strangely quiet in the early morning, with only a few distant bird calls floating in the air. You smelled the smell of soil mixed with moisture, as if last night's dream had not completely dissipated. Finally, you saw Bachak kneeling in front of a stone covered with some white crystals. It was not an ordinary rock, but a salt spirit stone, which was said to be the guardian spirit of the entire salt pan. He lit the fire in his hand and placed it on a pile of hay and twigs, and green smoke slowly emerged. He gently lit a few petals into the smoke, and began to pray in a low voice. "We took a lot of things from you," you heard him say, "but we are also transporting you. We let you go further." You were a little confused. This was not the usual worship the gods for good luck ceremony. It sounded more like explaining something to a friend. He squatted aside, secretly learning to make the same gestures, and also muttered a sentence that you were not sure what it meant. "Don't talk nonsense." Bachak suddenly spoke, scaring you. "Well, feel the atmosphere," you argued. He smiled, stood up, and patted you. "This is the soul of the salt field, not your new toy. If you want to be Ariel's salt merchant, you must first learn to respect it." You nodded, feeling a little timid, but also more serious. After you returned to the camp, he took you to a place you were not qualified to go before, the salt merchant's warehouse. It was a circle of low buildings surrounded by thick palm leaves. There were sentinels outside, and before entering, you had to pass a small path hidden behind the reeds. There was no gold, silver, or jewelry in the warehouse, nor any weapons. Only salt in various shapes and packages. "This is the preparation before the transaction." Bachak pointed to several piles of specially decorated salt bags. Different tribes like different styles. Some like to decorate with snake totems, and some only want square bags, and didn't accept round ones. You didn't expect that the packaging of salt is also ASEAN's. One year, our bags were made with the wrong pattern, and a batch of salt was rejected, he said. The trading losses that year almost made us bankrupt. You carefully picked up a salt bag decorated with red lines, feeling as careful as holding an egg in your hand. QA2 appeared again at this time. He always appeared accurately when you don't understand the most, and then threw one or two knowledge points to hit you. "You know what? Some archaeologists have found fragments of salt bags in Mayan ruins. The residual dyes on them prove that these decorations were not painted. Casually, they are the language of identity. You look at these salt bags and suddenly feel that they are like letters written to people far away. At noon, you and other workers carry these salts with status, pile them up in rows, and classify them according to roots. You learned a new word, kalamt, which is the name of some city-state nobles. Their salt bags have to be wrapped with thicker bark paper twice, and they have to be stuffed into a ceramic pot and sealed with wax. You think it as like packing a jar of treasure, because for them, this is a treasure, the instructor said. You gently put the last bag of salt on the top of the pile. At that moment, you feel like you are assembling a quietly shining future. The sunlight outside just fell on your sweaty forehead. You looked up and saw that the piles of salt bags reflected the golden light. No one spoke, but you knew that today you were indeed closer to the word salt merchant. That evening, Katu patted your shoulder. "You won't sleep here tonight." You instinctively leaned towards the stove. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he grinned. "You need to see the real life of a salt merchant." So with curiosity, you followed Katu into the other end of the salt field. There was no salt burning work area, nor a salt storage warehouse, but a hidden night market. You have never been here before. Even if you sneaked in before, you were driven out. Now you followed Katu and were welcomed in as half of our own people. That feeling was like being invited to a large wedding in a neighboring village, not knowing whether you were egoist or a cat who strayed into the scene. Torches illuminated rows of low stalls. Some people were selling dried fish, some were exchanging cocoa beans, and some were holding things that looked like ... teeth, saying they were amulets of jungle blessings. "This is the trading night, Ka," Tu whispered. "Salt is not only something to sell, but also a qualification to buy things." You noticed that the salt bags were never opened. Directly, Each stall owner knows the packaging methods of different villages. Sometimes they only need to look at the red lines, blue lines, or even the nodding method on the salt bag to know whether the batch of goods is reliable. An old woman saw the small salt bag on your back and waved to you. Her stall was filled with things you had never seen before. A small clay figurine wrapped in feathers, a string of shell-shaped seed necklaces, an apian that looked like Alizard's tail. "This is for exchanging salt," she said. You raised your eyebrows. "These ... can be exchanged for salt." "You don't understand," Katu interrupted. "In the Mayan world, practicality is not the only value. Symbols, rituals, memories, these can all be prized." You suddenly remembered that your history teacher once talked about Adam, cultural differences in the equivalence of things. It sounds academic, but it actually means you think it's junk, but others think it's a treasure. You looked at the pen and could end help asking, "What do you use to write with this?" The old woman smiled, mysterious lie like Alizard. "This is not for writing, it's for praying before writing." You nodded and pretended to understand. The night market was still bustling, with people exchanging salt for dance performances. Some people were willing to stand by the fire and do a harvest dance just to get a small bag of white salt. Someone else came in with 3 turkeys on his back and ended up exchanging for small bags of salt and a patterned ceramic cup. You were dazzled by what you saw and wanted to join in, but you were afraid of making the fool of yourself. Seeing this, QA2 handed you a small bag of salt and asked you to choose something to exchange. You hesitated for a moment and finally walked to a small stall that few people visited. There was an old booklet wrapped in bark paper, and the cover was made of dried banana peels. You thought the book looked like it had been kissed by the sun for 300 years. "What is this ... You asked the stall owner carefully. "A calendar," he said, "but it's old. From a village in the inland that no one lives in anymore." You immediately exchanged it for the small bag of salt. Maybe it's not worth it to others, but you like this kind of history that you can't understand. As the night deepened, Katu took you to his cabin. You thought the salt merchant slept luxurious lie, but he just slept in a hammock made of salty hemp rope. The only decoration was a string of fish, bones on the wall, and a small sign that said Don T. Touch my salt. Don tapped too romantic about the life of a salt merchant. He said, "Salt can be exchanged for many things, but it can also attract many people. You have to be alert at all times, especially in the rainy season." You lie on your side on a small cushion in the corner, holding the calendar that you can't understand, but your heart is extremely quiet. The salt fields are no longer noisy at night, and the torches are only dimly lit. You can hear a few night birds singing in the distance. You know that from tonight, you have really entered another level of world. You are no longer just a helper who burns salt, nor just an apprentice who carries salt. You begin to have choices, even exchanges. On the 3rd day, you are awakened by a burst of hurried footsteps. At dawn, Katu pushed the door open, his smile even more mysterious than last night. "You have to go to the lake today," he said. "Deliver salt and learn something new." You blinked half asleep. Delivering salt means carrying it on your back, right? He shook his head. "Not this time. This time it's by water." So for the first time, you stood by the canoa of the Mayan salt merchant. The water waves under your feet were shining with morning light, like crumpled corn leaves. You saw that the salt was carefully wrapped and tied to the rack at the bow, and even covered with a layer of banana peel to prevent moisture. It's not because of fear of moisture, but because of fear of the spirit of the lake water mixing in, the big brother at the helm said without raising his head. You thought he was joking at first, but no one laughed. You had to sit down, obedient, lie, and curl your feet into the cabin, as if this would make you more important. The canoe slowly sailed out of the lake. The water surface was as flat as a mirror, and the wind from the shore blew, and even the ends of your hair swayed. You look into the distance, listening to the rhythmic slapping of the oars on the water. On the other side of the lake is a trading town. You heard that you can not only buy and sell salt there, but also meet outsiders, travelers from the highlands, the deep jungle, and even other Mayan city-states. You have also heard some strange legends. Someone brought a kind of dancing jade sculpture. Someone mixed tobacco with salt to make a kind of spiritual salt only for ritual use. Someone sold a plant called Ika, saying that it can make people dream of the future. Of course, there is a lot of controversy in the academic community about these claims. Some people think that these strange salts are just folk tales and there is no solid evidence. But you didn't care so much about the authenticity. As long as it is in this world, it has its meaning. When the boat docked, you saw a young woman in very bright clothes and green feathers on her head bargaining with people at the trading dock. She spoke quickly, gestured exaggeratedly, and held a piece of cocoa leaf in her mouth, as if she had just walked out of a tribal gathering. She is a Dot Tama from the Salt Road branch in the southeast jungle. Ka, too, introduced. The salt there is not as fine as ours, but they add vanilla to it, making it more valuable. You were surprised. Salt can also add flavor. Of course, he shrugged. Many tribes use salt not to preserve food, but as a ritual item. Adding vanilla, flower petals, and even insect shells is not uncommon. You walked onto the dock with the salt bag and saw, with your own eyes, that some people exchanged jade for salt. Some used wooden signs with hieroglyphs as salt coupons, and some just raised a strange-shaped pottery jar and asked the stall owner to nod and say exchanged. After the transaction, you went to a warehouse on the edge of the town, which was a temporary storage place for overnight salt. For the first time, you saw the concept of hotel in the world of salt. Every salt merchant can temporarily deposit salt here and continue on the next day. There is also a slate notice engraved on the wall. No compensation for lost salt. At your own risk. You remember a sentence that Katu often said, "Salt merchants are always on the road." Now you understand the other meaning of this sentence. Not the romantic image of traveler, but the realistic money and trading terms. That night, you and other salt merchants sat around a pot of fire on the dock. An old man was chewing on adriated fish, pickled with salt, pointing to the starry sky and telling Astri, saying that there was an upside-down salt field hidden at the bottom of the lake, which was a pot overturned by the ancient salt god. You looked at him and smiled, and then looked at the fire. Light reflected on his face, and suddenly felt that the world of salt merchants was made up of salt connected with stories, legends, experience, and a little cunning. You looked back at the few bags of salt left over from today's transaction. They lay quietly in the warehouse, like messengers who are just returned from a long journey. You know that the real journey has just begun. The next morning, just after you rubbed your eyes, Ka-Tu had already stuffed Ed small bag of dry biscuits wrapped in palm leaves into your hands. "We are not going to take the lake road today," he said. "You have to go inland." You were still chewing the biscuits in your mouth. "Where are you going?" "To find the women." You almost choked on the biscuits. "What?" "It's the women who weave salt bags," he explained. "Without them, our salt can't reach the market at all." So you set foot on a small path to the salt bag workshop. The road is not far, but there are always unidentified flying birds whizzing through the bushes on both sides. Feeling like little spies in the tropical forest, you are a little suspicious whether these birds are specially trained to monitor the movements of salt merchants. Finally, on a platform on the hillside, you saw a row of low mud brick houses with palm leaves on the roofs, and several women sitting at the door weaving. They quickly shut the thin threads in their hands, and their movements were so graceful that they seemed meant to be performing some secret dance. Katu stopped and said, "Remember to take off your shoes before entering." Although they didn't talk much, respecting them means respecting your salt. You walked in, a little nervous. Unexpectedly, a woman who looked older than your grandmother winked at you and patted your butt hard. "You're new here, your hands are so thin. Have you never carried salt before?" The whole room laughed, and the atmosphere suddenly relaxed a lot. You learned to sit down and observe how they used bark, thread, and cotton to weave strong and elastic salt bags. Each salt bag has a specific totem. Some are fish, sweet, some are parrot feathers, and some are a series of small circles, like the cycle of the moon. These patterns can distinguish the place of origin. said a middle-aged woman named Ish. Each salt merchant uses a different one, like the ID card we make for the salt. You touched the totems and realized that they are not only decorations, but also a kind of brand label. If you take the wrong bag to the market, she continued, others will think you stole the goods. You nodded quickly. You also discovered that they would occasionally exhale into the bag while weaving. It was not a casual exhalation, but a rhythmic one, as if blowing in some blessing. This is a tradition in our family, Ish said, to exhale the spell of no leakage of salt. You wanted to laugh a little, but held it back. After all, you have learned too many things that seem superstitious, but are actually very useful. At lunch, they gave you a piece of sweet corn cake with salt. You were eating happily, and Ish suddenly said, men only see salt, but we see what salt can be exchanged for. You were stunned. We don't go to the market or travel far, she continued, but every bag of salt we make can be exchanged for cocoa is our sugar, cornmeal is our medicinal herb, and sometimes a bag of salt can be exchanged for a piece of land. You finally understood the true value of the salt bag. It is the silent hero behind the transaction. Without these sturdy and clearly marked salt bags, even if you are carrying a lot of salt, you may be suspected, rejected, or even robbed during the transaction. The academic community has discussed the topic. The circulation of salt depends on the invisible labor of women. You are now a living witness. You spent a whole afternoon trying to weave a small salt bag by yourself. Your fingers were rubbed red by the rope, but you finally made a crooked little bag. Ish looked at it and said, it can only hold salt for ants. We all laughed. When you left in the evening, they gave you Ariel salt bag with a new pattern on it, a little turtle crawling on a salt crystal. It's for you, Ish said. We decided that your mark is this slow turtle. You carried the salt bag down the mountain. Your steps were a little light. Maybe salt is heavy, but identity is light. You know that you are no longer the foreign apprentice who knows nothing. You are a person with a totem. Today you learned one thing. Salt is not only salt, it is also a math. Ka too did not wake you up today. An old woman with shell earrings and 3 red lines on her face walked into your hut. Her name is Makyu. She is the accountant of the Salt Merchants Guild, and the person you are going to visit today. You have been walking for so many days. Have you discovered one thing? She asked you. You thought about it? Everyone likes to exchange salt with other things. She smiled and shook her head. No, every bag of salt looks very similar, but the things you get in return are different. You were shocked. Indeed, sometimes a bag of salt is exchanged for a basket of fruit, and sometimes it is only exchanged for a handful of dry leaves, and even people bargain to almost nothing, so we have to calculate. She shook out a piece of bark paper covered with hieroglyphs. We track the destination, return, and circulation trajectory of each bag of salt. You looked closer and found that the pattern on the paper was extremely complicated. Circles represent salt bags, dots are distances, arrows represent exchange directions, and there are some strange spirals and color changes. These are our salt accounts. You swallowed. Is this ... a Mayan Excel spreadsheet? She didn't understand what you were saying, but smiled. If that's the language of the gods, we already know how to speak it. You followed her to the hut behind the salt warehouse, which was her office. You saw a small hill of stones, each of which was engraved with symbols and arranged like Amin City. This is an old tradition called stone code recording method, she explained. Each stone represents a month, each row represents a caravan, and each groove represents the flow of goods. You squatted down and touched the stones, some of which have been weathered. Some still have the latest scratches, and there is even one that says lost in the storm. Do you also record losses? Of course, she frowned. Do you know what losing salt will cause? Trust collapses. Our world is not maintained by force, but by everyone's belief. If you give me 2 bags of salt today, I can exchange them for something of equal value tomorrow. You began to understand that the world of salt merchants seems to be free-flowing, but behind it is a strict salt-based system. We have a zat of reference indicators to measure the value of salt. Ma Q continued, including the source, transportation distance, season, salt particle size, and even weather. She pointed to a small piece of paper. Look, this batch of salt is collected before the rainy season, so it is drier and has a longer shelf life. So it is more valuable than the salt in the rainy season. You can't help but sigh. You actually have market forecasts. She smiled. We call it cloud forecasting. Looking at the thickness of the clouds, the direction of the wind, and the sound of the parrots, you guessed that. Historians must still be arguing whether financial model has any basis, but after experiencing it on the spot, you have completely believed it. What shocked you even more was that she showed you something called a rotating account book, all wood and disc, with different salt roads and merchants engraved on each part. Just turn it. You can find out which road is most often out of stock, which merchant is used to bargaining, and which market is fiercely competitive. In which month? You are stunned. Do you still have an early data analysis system? This is not magic, she said lightly. It's just that we don't rely on paper, but on memory and objects. You sat next to her and watched her use Athens stick to draw a salt road map on the sand today. Which salt ship has set off, which batch of salt is waiting to be packaged, and which new apprentice has just learned to set prices. You will try to go to the market alone tomorrow, she said. You'll have to learn how to negotiate, but before that, you have to know how much your salt is worth. You nodded and wrote down every detail she said. In your eyes, salt is no longer as simple as a crystal. It is on it of trust, a particle of information, and a concentrate of value. You seem to see a wall network woven by salt lines. It flows underground, exchanges in the air, and weighs in people's hearts. And you have finally learned how to read this network. You stand at the edge of the port market, carrying a bag of fresh flyweight salt on your back, your heart beating faster than a drum. Don't be nervous. Katu patted your shoulder. They can smell newcomers, but they won't eat people. You nodded, pretending to be calm. But in fact, you haven't thought about how to make an offer. This is your first time alone in the Mayan market. Hey? Place that is more chaotic and noisy than you imagined, but also so vivid that it makes people feel like they are in a dream. There are colors all around. Feathers dyed red, piles of chili strings, small idols made of cornmeal by children, and various peddlers shuttling back and forth. You look at the bag of salt at your feet, and the totem turtle looks at you quietly, as if saying, "Come on, don't chop too hard." You take a deep breath and walk to a fruit stall. The stall owner is a young woman with 3 braids. She is using a branch to drive away a monkey that wants to steal guava. Can I... exchange salt for your bananas? She raised her eyebrows at you. 1 bag for 5 bunches. You panicked. 5 bunches. Yesterday, I saw Ka to exchange. 1 bag for 10 bunches. He is Ka too. She spread her hands. You are not. You froze there, not knowing how to refute. She smiled. You have the tortoise totem. You should take it slow. Finally, you gritted your teeth. Then 1 bag for 6 bunches, plus some chili. She stared at you for a few seconds and nodded. Deal. This is your first time to make a deal. Although you may still feel a little ripped off, you are very excited. You walked through other areas of the market, and each vendor had different rules. Some insisted on only coarse salt, some only accepted bags from ascertained salt field, and some even asked you to open them on the spot to check the humidity. One of the old men actually used aparo to test the quality of the salt he sprinkled. A little salt in a wooden bowl, and if the parrot licked it quickly, it meant that it was just the right saltiness. This is our family test method, he said with narrowed eyes. Parrots are more picky than human mouths. You didn't know whether to laugh or believe, but in the end the parrot really gave you a bunch of dried fruits in return. A few hours later, your salt bag was half empty, and your backpack was filled with various trophies, wood carvings, candied fruits, herbal ointments, and even a small ceramic bell. You realized that the transactions here are not just barter. You saw someone exchanged singing for salt. Someone exchanged labor for helping to move goods. And a little boy exchanged a picture of Quetzalcoatl, a towel he drew for a pinch of salt. Just a pinch of salt. His mother said that was his favorite painting, someone explained. You suddenly felt that salt cement to have become a universal dream currency. Everyone exchanged it for things they needed, were willing to share, or could not be priced at all. Historians once debated, did the Mayan trading system have the concept of currency? Now you feel that this question itself limits imagination. You also encountered a strange scene. A woman divided the salt into 5 small bags, put them into 5 pottery jars of different colors, tied them with thin wires, and stuffed them into bamboo tubes. She said it was a gift package for the mountain god that would ensure good weather and good harvests in her cornfield. You can't sprinkle salt directly, otherwise it will scare the mountain god. You remember the spell when Ish wove the salt bag, and the story of the parrot testing the salt, and couldn't help but sigh. Salt has never been just a trading item. It is the language between people and the world. On the way back, Katu helped you carry part of the goods. How was it the first day? I lost the bargaining several times, and the parrot even evaluated the salt. He smiled. That means you are officially on the road. You walked on the way back to the warehouse, and the sunset cast golden light from the horizon. You looked back at the market, and those people's sounds, smells, and colors were still jumping in your mind. You know that you are really involved, not just in history, but living in it. You thought you were already in the business, until you met Aerial Master, underwater salt merchant Wu Pa. When he appeared, the whole port was quiet for a few seconds, not because he was so scary, but because he was so special. Wu Pa was as thin as a dried rattan, with wrinkles all over his face, an old bamboo basket on his back. His fingers had become as curved as old turtle claws because of years of soaking in salt water. He was not an ordinary salt merchant, but a person who mined salt from underwater salt wells. Katu blinked at you. Today you should see the real marginal business. You followed Wu Pa to the south, leaving the port market, passing through a seeming forgotten wetland, and walked for almost an hour before you saw a salt pool with steam coming out of the ground. But Wu Pa was not referring to this place. He took you to Asmo Pool, full of reeds, lifted a few pieces of floating bark on the water, and a word and ladder was revealed underneath, leading all the way to the bottom of the water. Do you want to go down and take a look? You hesitated for 3 seconds, then nodded. After all, who can refuse a dungeon plot that allows you to go down to collect salt? You tied your belt and slowly climbed down the slippery ladder. The water was cold and had a strange smell of sulfur. The lower you went, the more you could feel a kind of ancient tranquility surrounding you. This well was dug by several generations of our family. Wu Pa's voice came from above. It is not for drinking water, but for taking the salt given by God. You climbed to the bottom and saw that the bottom of the well was not actually deep, and the water was about up to your chest. But when you looked down, the bottom of the water was covered with a layer of fine sand that shone with silver light. Wu Pa jumped down and demonstrated to you. He picked up a tool similar to a gourd and scraped the bottom of the water to collect moist salt crystals. He then filtered out impurities with a special sieve, and what was left was the real God salt. This kind of salt is rare and can only crystallize under certain climates, moon phases, and water temperatures, he said as he operated. So it is more expensive than ordinary salt. Sometimes it is used to make medicine, and sometimes it is used for rituals. You tasted a little bit, and the taste was bitter, but the taste was strangely cool. Is this your secret weapon? You asked. He smiled like a smart fox. It's not a secret, but no one is willing to soak it in water for 3 days and 3 nights to scrape it. You also found a stone trough by the well, which contained dried underwater salt and asmo, handful of pink salt mixed with flower petals. We will make mixed salt, he said, with fragrance and color, and sometimes add a little crushed cocoa shell. Who is it for? Important guests, or exchanged for rare goods from afar, such as red turkey feathers and Central American blue jade. You remember the information you read before, saying that the Maya had salt art, and at that time you thought it was just an exaggeration of literati. Now it seems that these salts are not just condiments, but edible beliefs. Historians are still arguing whether you have a luxury economy. You said with a smile, in fact, you are just more sentimental than us. UP raised his eyebrows. Luxury? We just make the salt worthy of its journey. After returning to the ground, he handed you a small bag of magic salt that had just been scraped out, and you took it like a stone that fell from the moon. Take it to the market. Remember to tell them it is deep well 3 nights salt, he said. See how many cocoa beans they offer. You nodded, thinking that the name sounds like it makes people want to pay. This experience made you realize that the salt industry is actually very finely divided. From salt drying, salt boiling, to diving for salt like UP. Each has its own set of skills and pride, and you, a half-baked novice, are piecing together these fragments into a complete world bit by bit. The rainy season is coming. As you carry the salt back, you look at the lead-gray cloud slowly approaching in the sky and mutter to yourself, can we dry it for 2 more days? In the world of Mayan salt merchants, weather is not a topic but a science or a destiny. The dry season is the golden period. When the rainy season comes, half of the salt pond will become soup. Ish muttered while checking the seams of the salt bags. You have to learn to listen to the wind, watch the clouds, and most important lie, watch the ants moving. You can't help laughing. Is this your weather station? She glared at you. Ants are much more accurate than you. In the next few days, you really started to pay attention. 2 ants. You found that when they move, they will avoid certain potholes and spread leaves on the road, which often indicates that there will be heavy rain within 2 days. There is also Asmal frog, called raindrop frog, as long as they call very frequently at night dawn. Think about drying salt. You didn't expect that you would observe the frog croaking curve for salt, but the preparation before the rainy season is an all-out battle. You have to help move all the dried salt into the warehouse, stacking bags like mini pyramids. Palm leaves are inserted between the layers of salt bags to absorb moisture and prevent moisture. Ish teaches you how to knock on the bag to listen. If the sound is muffled, it means that the salt has been damp and needs to be aired again. You begin to realize that salt is not a commodity that is finished and finished at all. It is a substance that changes every day. A little moisture can make it return to its original state, as if it is resisting human control. Sometimes, eating salt is like an old grandmother, Ish said while sewing salt bags. You have 2 cokes, eat and take care of it. If you neglect it, it will get upset. You secret lie, observe the old salt workers. They don't talk much, but each of them has their own way of dealing with moisture ghosts. Some people light incense on the salt piles. Some hang some kind of feather, charms at the door of the warehouse, and some even pour corn pulp on the ground to calm the ground. Historians are still debating whether these customs have any practical effect, you mutter to yourself. But we all know that without these rituals, people would not sleep well at night. One day, you helped count the inventory in the warehouse and found a bag of salt that was particularly heavy. When you opened it, you found that it had formed salt pillars similar to crystals. This is a natural seal, Katu said after taking a look. We occasionally find salt bags that seal themselves. Some people say it is a good omen. You kept it and carefully drew a turtle on the bag. The first thunderstorm of the rainy season finally came. The night it came, the air was as wet as cloth that had drunk water, and the clouds were so low that they almost pressed on the roof. When lightning flashed across the sky, the whole salt village was quiet for a few seconds, as if listening to the call of ancient gods. The next day, water began to accumulate in the pool. You walked on the muddy path and found that the ants had indeed moved to higher ground, and the croaking of frogs was heard one after another. This is a period of rhythm change, said Ish. In the rainy season, salt merchants do not dry salt, but sort out accounts, repair tools, and visit neighboring villages. You also began to learn how to sew salt bags, reorganize unsold goods at the market, and even learned a little spell, although you still can tell the difference between praying for good luck and praying not to catch a cold. You'll realize that the life of the entire community actually revolves around salt and seasons. The dry season is running, and the rainy season is closing, pausing, and polishing. And now, you are no longer just a novice carrying salt. You have become someone who knows how to see ants, listen to frogs, and understand the smell of moisture. This is the real growth of the salt merchant, not only fast footsteps and hard shoulders. But you begin to understand what the salt and the weather are saying. One morning in the rainy season, you woke up earlier than the thunder while adding firewood to the brazier. Ish reminded you, today we are going to participate in the annual Salt Road Exchange Day. You blinked. It sounds like a large-scale social gathering of salt merchants. Almost. She smiled. But you'd better not think too romantically about it. This is a meeting to settle accounts starting from salt bags. You walked along a wet ancient road for nearly half a day, passing through swamps, shrubs, and a slope that can be called a wild stretching course. You finally arrived at an open grassland. It was one of the transfer stations on the Mayan Salt Road, called Yahalal. It is not as lively as the market here, and there are no shouting and hawking. Instead, there are quiet but busy faces and scattered goods: salt honey feathers, cornmeal, dried meat, kapok fiber, and even rare brass ornaments. This is a place for balanced exchange between salt merchants and other tribes, similar to an expo without copper coins. We don't use a standard price, Katu said as he spread out the salt bags, but look at relationships, needs, and who's luckier this year. You followed them to sit in a corner of the grass, watching an elderly businessman and Iam, dealer from the highlands, exchange ideas. Salt for yam, that sounds fair, you said. Ish shook his head. Not always fair, but always need each other. You soon discovered that there was no bargaining noise here, only a subtle, tacit negotiation. One raised an eyebrow, one nodded, one shook the bag, one spread his hands. The deal was done. You took out the small bag of deep well, 3 night salt given by Wu Pa and gently placed it in front of you. Not long after, a young woman in a colorful feather cloak came over, sniffed it, dipped her fingers in the salt and licked it, and nodded. She took out RL of spice bags from her backpack, which contained dried lavender and a blue plant root. This comes from the far west coast of Yucatan, she whispered. It can make salt sweet and is suitable for pregnant women. You can hardly believe it. There is salt customized for specific groups of people. Historians have been arguing whether the Maya NS had the concept of segmented markets. You thought to yourself, but in front of you, these non-standardized D-goods are the real essence of trading. You imitated her, handed the salt over, and nodded gently. She smiled, handed over the vanilla bag, and then drew Asmo's circle on your palm, a non-textual transaction completed symbol. You suddenly feel that this kind of word, less transaction, is more reassuring than shouting how many cocoa beans. Ish told you that the Salt Road Exchange Day is not who wins and who loses, but who remembers each other's taste. Next time she sees you, she might bring other roots to go with your salt, she said. That's why we come every year, even if we didn't exchange much this year. You looked at the crowd on the grass. They nodded, smiled, exchanged food and salt, as if the world could be connected without war, just by saltiness. You finally understood that salt is not just a commodity. It is an extension of a relationship, a network that is maintained by taste and trust without contracts. That evening, you walked back on your way with a cloth bag filled with a few novel goods. The clouds on the horizon were still thick, but there was a little more sweet spice in the wind. You silently read this day in your heart and decided to come back to participate next year no matter what, because you are no longer an apprentice who bumps into the market blindly, but a traveler who has left his own taste on the salt road. When you walk into the salt village again, rain has become a daily background, like a tap that the sky forgot to turn off, dripping on the banana leaves with a gentle rhythm that makes you sleepy. You thought that the rainy season was Astapage, but soon found that you thought too simply. Salt merchants never completely stop business, Ish said, handing you a bundle of yellow rattan. We just changed our way of life, so you began to follow everyone into the world under the roof, repairing broken salt bags, reweaving carrying ropes, pickling leftover food, and even a kind of work that is quite straining, mixing dried fish, bone powder, and salt into a mysterious substance called prayer ash, which is reserved for festivals. Don't ask me what theological basis is, Ish said while stirring. We also believe while doing it, You find that although these indoor jobs tend to make you burn like drying salt, they test your patience more. For example, to dry the damp salt again and sift it into powder, you need to use a disc made of volcanic stone, and your arms will be sore from turning it around. Who said salt is white? This is gray-yellow, and even a little orange. You sighed as you sifted. The color indicates the source. Ka-tu leaned against the door and said, deep well salt is gray, pond salt is white, and coastal salt is a little pink. You remember, read this knowledge point in your mind. But what surprised you even more was that salt also has flavor descriptions. Some are spicy, some are smooth, and there is a taste called tongue jumping, which is considered to be the best for sacrifice. Historical circles have been arguing whether the Maya Anas had a systematic language of taste, vocabulary you thought as you worked. But if taste can guide trade, then it is a kind of language. One afternoon, when you were sorting salt jars, you found every detailed relief engraved on it. It was an eye, with a turquoise in the middle. You asked Ish what this meant. She smiled. That's the salty eye. This ... will monitor me if eat too much salt. She laughed. It's a symbol of the salt spirit, representing that every grain of salt you see is actually looking at you. This explanation sounds a bit philosophical, but you can't help but draw a salty eye on your own. Salt jar with charcoal is like leaving a trace of a little smile in this long rainy season. There is also a strange task called salt curse entanglement, which is to write down the strange things that salt merchants encounter in a year. Write them into grass talismans with palm leaves. Put them in an asmal jar filled with gray salt. Seal them and bury them in the corner of the warehouse. This is our own year-end summary. Ish said, the spell is not to curse others, but to seal those things we don't want to bring into the next season. You also wrote one in secret lie, put it in the jar, which said, I didn't want to be chased by that red salted fish again. It was an embarrassing accident. When you fell in the market, you finally discovered that in the salt village during the rainy season, every seemingly repetitive action is actually sorting yourself. Not drying salt, but drying experience. Not moving goods, but moving yourself in the past year. You are no longer in a hurry to do things, but start to learn to sit down and listen to others. The stories told by old salt merchants never end. When I was young, I almost married an embroidery girl who came to buy salt. Our salt that year was struck by lightning 3 times, and it turned out to be Tiang salt. These stories are as long as the sound of rain, without high notes or a grand ending, but they settle in your heart little by little. The rainy season in the salt village has also become the softest chapter in your memory. One night, you stood alone at the door of the warehouse, watching the water droplets dripping from the eaves. You suddenly wondered, what would happen if the salt was washed away by the rain? Maybe it would return to the original vein, waiting for a craftsman to discover it again. Just like you, originally just an outsider who accidentally broke into the Mayan village, but now you have your own salty eye. You stand at the edge of a salt field. The rainy season has finally ended, and the air is filled with a fresh scent of dust. The sun peeks out from the clouds like an old friend you haven't seen for a long time, and sprinkles on your face. Ish stands beside you, raises his hand to his forehead to shade himself, squinting and saying, it's time to start the next season. You smile and nod, stepping on the slightly slippery mud, which is the skin of the salt field that is about to dry. You can now tell what kind of mud is best for sealing water, what kind of crystal corners are easy to break, and even tell at a glance which stack of salt bags was not made solid enough last year. You are not an apprentice. You have become a salt merchant, but the real becoming is not because of how many skills you have mastered, but because you understand how to wait, exchange, make mistakes, listen, and stand firm in the mud. Today you have to complete a ritual. Send the first batch of salt you dried by hand to a highland village called Naha. That was the route it took when I was a kid and went out to collect salt with the team for the first time. Ish said, I fell 3 times, cried twice, and finally sang to carry the salt bag to the mountain. What did you sing? I don't remember the lyrics, but I remember the rhythm. She smiled and tapped the strap on your shoulder. Let's go, you sing today. So you carried the salt bag and walked on the mountain road called Sky Ridge Road with Kietu, Ish, and 2 other caravan members. The road is steeper than you imagined, but the scenery along the way is also more magnificent. The mist rises slowly from the valley, like the soul of salt wandering in the air. You stop to take a breath from time to time, and sometimes even rely on a wood end stick to support your body, but you never let go. Halfway through, you met a group of fruit merchants coming down the mountain. They tasted a little of your salt and said, "This is new salt, with a light woody fragrance." You couldn't help laughing out loud. That might be what I brought in when I fell into the woodpile. They laughed and patted you on the back. Then you must remember that people who sell salt will always mix in a little bit of their own stories. Historians often question whether these tastes identifications are really scientifically based. You thought as you continued to walk forward, but you know that people who really understand salt are actually tasting life. When you arrived at Naha village, the children ran around you, pointing at the salt bags and asking, "Is this the legendary salty taste under the clouds?" You smiled and poured the salt into the village's pottery jars. Little by little, the elder came out, holding a bunch of dried mangoes as a thank you gift, and tied a salt merchant knot made of fiberglass on your arm. At that moment, although your shoulders were sore, your heart was as bright and strong as a fresh, dried salt block. You sit on a Asmal stone bench at the edge of the village, looking at the road you came from. You know you will walk this mountain road again, maybe with different salt and give it to different people, but the salt road in your heart will never be broken. Yish handed you a piece of dry bread and asked, "Now you know what salt is like." You looked at the cracked edge of the biscuit, thought for a while and said softly, "It is a silent and stubborn thing, like us. It is also like a road." She didn't speak but just smiled gently. When dusk fell, you prepared to return. You adjusted the straps with your shoulders, and your steps were a little lighter, not because it was empty, but because you put something more important in it. You looked back at the highland village for the last time, and the sun just shone on the salt pots, as if they were nodding to you. You remember the woman named Ish, the prickly corners of the salt field, the weight of the salt bag, and the salty eye painted on the jar. The world is too big, and you have been in a corner of it, carrying salt, walking through silent exchanges, hiding unspoken wishes, and leaving your own salty without making any noise, and accompany you into the next dream. You have gone far enough tonight. Just stop quietly. Good night.